Imagine standing on the edge of a pier so high that the water below is just a dark, shifting mirror, too far down to see the waves, only to feel the vast emptiness of the drop. You have trusted your eyes your entire life, you have trusted your sense of balance, the solid feeling of the wooden planks beneath your feet, and the distant cry of the gulls overhead. But now, imagine that the plank you are standing on is not wood at all, but a single beam of light projected from the shore behind you, and the pier behind you has vanished, and the voice in your head that tells you this is solid, that this is real, that you are safe, suddenly falls silent. That silence, that profound and terrifying moment when the internal narrator stops speaking, is where our story begins. It is the story of what happens when you stop trusting the one thing you have never had any choice but to believe, your own mind. We live our entire lives in a constant, intimate conversation with ourselves. It is a voice so close that we mistake it for our very identity. It narrates our day, it warns us of danger, it replays conversations from 5 years ago and imagines conversations that will never happen. It tells us we are right, it tells us we are wrong, it tells us we are hungry, it tells us we are in love. This voice is the architect of our reality, building a world for us to live in, brick by brick, thought by thought, from the moment we wake to the moment we fall asleep. But what if that architect went on strike? What if the scaffolding of your reality suddenly collapsed, and you were left standing in the rubble, looking at the pieces and realizing you had no idea which ones were real and which ones were just the furniture of a dream you never knew you were having? To stop trusting your own mind is not the same as doubting a memory, or second-guessing a decision. Those are the small, manageable earthquakes that shake the pictures on the wall but leave the house standing. No, this is something far more fundamental. It is the moment you realize the house itself might be built on a cloud. It begins subtly, often not with a bang, but with a kind of echo. You might be having a conversation with a friend, a perfectly normal conversation about a movie you both saw, and you reach for the name of the actor, and it is gone. Not on the tip of your tongue, not hiding just behind a mental curtain, but simply gone, as if it was never there. You shrug it off, you laugh about getting older, and the moment passes. But later that night, lying in the dark, you try to recall the conversation itself, and you find the edges of that memory are strangely blurry. You remember the friend, you remember the cafe, but the words that were spoken, your own words, feel less like a recording and more like a story you have told yourself so many times that the truth of it has worn thin. This is the first, almost imperceptible crack in the foundation. And like any crack, if you stare at it long enough, it begins to look less like an imperfection and more like a pattern. You start to notice other moments. You walk into a room with a purpose, and by the time you cross the threshold, the purpose has evaporated. You stand there, looking at the familiar space, and it feels alien, like a stage set for a play you have not been cast in. The feeling passes, but the memory of the feeling lingers. You begin to check yourself, to test your own cognition like a pilot running through a pre-flight checklist. Did I lock the door? Yes, I remember the click. But do I remember the click, or do I remember remembering the click 100 times before? The distinction becomes terrifyingly important. And then, one day, you have an argument with someone you love. It is a sharp, painful argument, the kind that leaves a metallic taste in your mouth. And in the aftermath, as you replay the words in your head, a new thought creeps in, a thought so cold and invasive it stops your breath. You are absolutely certain of what you said, and absolutely certain of what they said in return. But then, a piece of evidence surfaces, a text message, a voicemail, a witness. And it shows, with an objective, unforgiving clarity, that your memory of the event is not just slightly off, it is completely inverted. You were not the one who was wronged, you were the one who did the wrong. The story you had been telling yourself, the story that justified your anger and your pain, the story that made you the victim, was a fiction your own mind had created to protect you from the unbearable truth that you were the aggressor. This is the moment the floor gives way. Because if your mind can rewrite the past to make you feel better, to protect your ego, to keep your narrative intact, then what else has it rewritten? What other painful truths has it smoothed over with comforting lies? And if it can do that to the past, what is it doing to the present? Is the kindness you see in a stranger's eyes really there, or is it a filter your mind applies to make the world feel less hostile? Is the slight you felt from a colleague a deliberate act of disrespect, or did your mind interpret a moment of distraction as a personal attack to feed a pre-existing narrative of your own unimportance? You are no longer living in the world, you are living in a world your mind has edited, revised, and published just for you, and you have just realized you have been reading a draft full of errors, unable to trust a single word on the page. The first thing that happens, the immediate and visceral consequence, is a kind of sensory vertigo. The world, which was once a solid, predictable place, begins to shimmer. You look at a tree, and for a fleeting, terrifying second, it doesn't look like a tree. It looks like a collection of green and brown pixels that your brain has hastily assembled into the concept of a tree. You are no longer seeing the tree, you are seeing the process of seeing, and it is deeply unreliable. The sound of a friend's laugh, once a source of warmth, now sounds like a recording of a laugh, a sample played back at the wrong speed. The feeling of your own hand touching your face feels distant, as if you are watching a stranger in a film perform an action you have scripted but cannot feel. This is the collapse of what psychologists call cognitive ease. Your brain, that magnificent, energy-saving machine, is constantly taking shortcuts. It uses heuristics, mental rules of thumb, to process the avalanche of sensory information so you don't have to consciously interpret every shadow and every sound. It makes assumptions. It fills in the blanks. It predicts what will happen next based on what happened before. This is how you can drive a familiar route home while thinking about something else entirely, arriving without any memory of the journey. Your mind was on autopilot, and it worked perfectly. But when you stop trusting your mind, you are forced to switch off the autopilot. You have to grab the controls yourself. And suddenly, every moment requires conscious effort. Every step you take, you have to consciously decide to put one foot in front of the other. Every sentence you hear, you have to consciously decode the meaning of each word, checking it against a dictionary you no longer fully trust. It is mentally, spiritually, and physically exhausting. The world becomes a place of terrifying ambiguity. A dog barking down the street is no longer just a dog barking. It could be a warning, it could be a threat, it could be a hallucination, it could be a memory of a dog that barked 10 years ago bleeding into the present. You cannot assign meaning to anything because the meaning-making machine is broken. You are drowning in data without a map. And in this state of total uncertainty, your mind, even though you don't trust it, cannot help but try to fill the void. It hates a vacuum. It will grasp at any explanation, any story, no matter how thin, to make the world make sense again. But because you don't trust it, every explanation it offers feels like a trap. You become trapped in a recursive loop of doubt. You think, maybe I'm just tired. But then you think, is that a genuine insight, or is my mind just offering me a comfortable excuse so I stop questioning it? You think, I need help. And then, is that a real need, or is that a narrative my mind is constructing to cast me in the role of the victim who needs saving? This internal loop, this endless, chattering, self-canceling dialogue, is its own form of torture. It is like being in a room with two mirrors facing each other, creating an infinite reflection of yourself, each copy slightly more distorted than the last. You are trying to find the real you, the original image, but all you see are reflections of reflections, stretching away into a pointless infinity. And the loneliest part of it all is that you cannot share this with anyone. How do you explain to a loved one that you are not sure if the love you feel for them is real, or just a chemical pattern, a comforting story your brain tells you to ensure the survival of the species? How do you tell your child that when you look at them, you see a collection of features that your mind has assembled into a face you are supposed to recognize, but the feeling of recognition, the warmth that should accompany it, feels like a memory of a feeling rather than the feeling itself? The people around you begin to notice a change, but they misread it completely. They see you becoming distant, withdrawn, hesitant. They think you are depressed. They think you are angry with them. They offer comfort for their own pain, and their comfort feels like another language, another reality you cannot access. They tell you to snap out of it, to just trust your gut, to listen to your heart. But your gut is just another part of this untrustworthy system, and your heart is a muscle that pumps blood, and the poetic meaning you once attached to it now seems like a dangerous fantasy. You are alone on that pier of light, and everyone else is standing on the solid shore, waving at you, telling you to just walk back, not understanding that the path they see does not exist for you. And then, something else begins to happen, something even more profound than the doubt. A strange kind of silence starts to descend. It is not a peaceful silence, not at first. It is the silence after the collapse, when the screaming has stopped and the dust is settling. The voice that used to narrate your life, the constant commentator, has grown hoarse from its endless, circular arguments. It is exhausted. It starts to speak less, and when it does, its pronouncements are weaker, more tentative. You start to notice the spaces between the thoughts. For your entire life, you have been living in the torrent of the stream of consciousness, but now, for the first time, you are becoming aware of the streambed itself. The silence is vast, and in that vastness, something new is possible. It is in this silence that you begin to encounter the world directly, without the mediator. You are sitting in a park, and the doubt is still there, a low-grade hum in the background. But for a moment, the hum fades. And you see a leaf fall from a tree. You don't think, that is a beautiful, brown oak leaf, a symbol of autumn and the passage of time. You don't construct a poetic sentence about it. You just see it. The color brown, the shape, the spinning motion, the way the light catches its edge for a fraction of a second. It is just a phenomenon, an event in the field of your awareness. It has no label, no meaning, no story attached to it. And in that moment, the separation between you and the leaf collapses. There is no you observing a leaf. There is just the observing, just the falling, just the being. It is a moment of pure, uninterpreted experience. And it is terrifyingly beautiful. This is the paradox at the heart of this journey. The very thing that shattered your world, the loss of trust in your mind's ability to accurately represent reality, is the same thing that can open the door to a different kind of living. You have spent your life confusing the map with the territory. You thought the map was the territory. You argued with people about whose map was correct. You bled and cried over the borders drawn on your map. You built your entire identity, your entire sense of self, on the particular map your mind created. And now the map is gone. It has been revealed as a fiction. And you are left alone in the actual territory, without a guide, without a path, without even a name for the things you are seeing. For a long time, this is a place of pure terror. It is the wilderness. Every instinct you have screams at you to build a new map, to find a new guide, to restore the comfortable illusion of certainty. But you have seen behind the curtain. You know the maps are just maps. You cannot unsee it. So you sit in the wilderness, and you learn to be still. You learn to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing. You learn to watch your thoughts arise, not as absolute truths, but as weather patterns in the mind. A thought appears, you are a failure. Before, you would have grabbed that thought, married it, worn it as an identity for the rest of the day. Now, you just watch it. You see it drift across the sky of your awareness, and you let it drift away. It has no power because you no longer automatically endorse it. You no longer trust it. This is the slow, arduous rebuilding. But you are not rebuilding a map. You are learning to navigate without one. You are learning to use your senses, your intuition, your reason, not as infallible instruments that produce the truth, but as tools, as approximations, as useful fictions. You know that your perception of your partner's mood might be wrong, so you ask them, genuinely, without assuming you already know the answer. You know your memory of a past event is a story, not a recording, so you hold it lightly, open to new information, open to the possibility that you were wrong. You know the voice in your head is not you, it is just a function, a survival mechanism that has gotten a little overexcited, and you can choose to listen to it or not, just as you can choose to listen to the radio or turn it off. And in this state of not knowing, of radical uncertainty, a strange and wonderful thing begins to happen. You start to experience a kind of freedom you never knew existed. The prison of certainty, the prison of a fixed identity, the prison of a world rigidly defined by an untrustworthy mind, has been dismantled. You are no longer the character in the story, you are the space in which the story unfolds. You are no longer the thoughts, you are the awareness that watches the thoughts. The anxiety of making the wrong decision dissolves, because you know that no decision is ever final, and no outcome is ever as solid as your mind predicts it will be. You can move through life with a new kind of grace, the grace of a trapeze artist who has finally accepted that there is no net, and that the flying itself is the entire point. There will be moments when the old fear returns, when the ground feels shaky and the old voice screams for your attention. You will have days where you long for the comfortable lies, for the simple, solid world everyone else seems to live in. You will doubt your sanity. But then, you will see a leaf fall, just a leaf, and for a moment, you will be back in the territory, and the silence will return, and you will remember why you are here. You are not here to have a perfect mind. You are here to live a real life. And a real life, lived without the comforting distortions of an untrustworthy narrator, is a life of terrifying, beautiful, and ultimately liberating truth. And so you stand on the edge of that pier of light, and you look down into the dark, shifting mirror of the water. You no longer know if the drop will kill you or if you will simply pass through it like a ghost. You no longer know if the pier is real or a projection. But you know that you are standing. You know that you are breathing. And you know, with a certainty that comes from nowhere and everywhere, that the only thing you can truly trust is this moment itself, this living, breathing, unknowable moment, and your capacity to meet it with open eyes and a heart that has learned to beat in the silence. There is a particular quality of light that exists only in the hour just before dawn, when the world holds its breath and the boundary between night and day becomes so thin you could almost reach through it. It was in this liminal light that you found yourself walking through a city you had lived in for 20 years, a city you knew as intimately as the lines on your own palm, and yet on this morning, after the collapse, after the silence had begun to settle into something almost resembling peace, you realized you had never truly seen it before. The buildings were not just buildings anymore, they were arrangements of glass and stone that had been standing there for decades, silently witnessing thousands of lives unfold beneath their shadows. And you, in all your years of hurrying past them with a mind full of destinations and deadlines and judgments about their architectural merits, had never once stopped to simply witness them witnessing you. This is the strange gift that arrives unannounced when you stop trusting your mind to tell you what things mean. You are freed from the tyranny of meaning itself. You walk past a homeless man sleeping in a doorway, and the old narrative does not rise up to meet him, the narrative that would label him as a tragedy or a failure or a symbol of societal decay or a reason to feel guilty or a reason to look away. Instead, you just see a human form, curled in the gray light, breathing. You see the worn sole of his shoe, the way his hand is tucked under his cheek like a child's, the slow rise and fall of his chest. And because you are not busy telling yourself a story about him, you are actually present with him for the first time. You feel a connection that has nothing to do with pity or judgment, a simple recognition of shared humanity, of shared breath, of shared existence in this mysterious moment before the sun comes up. But let us be clear about something. This state of being is not a permanent destination. It is not a mountaintop you reach and then build a cabin on. It is more like a tide that comes in and goes out, sometimes rising to cover the jagged rocks of your old fears, sometimes receding to leave them exposed and treacherous. There will be mornings when you wake up and the old voice is back, refreshed from its slumber, louder and more convincing than ever. It will tell you that this whole experiment in not trusting your mind was just another trick your mind played on you, a clever way to avoid responsibility, a spiritual bypass around the hard work of living. It will tell you that you are delusional, that you have gone too far down a path of no return, that you need to get back to solid ground before it is too late. And in those moments, the ground will feel very far away indeed. You will find yourself standing in the cereal aisle of a grocery store, surrounded by brightly colored boxes, each one screaming its promises of nutrition and happiness in fonts designed by committees of psychologists, and you will be paralyzed. Not by the choice of which cereal to buy, but by the overwhelming absurdity of the entire scene. You will see the boxes as what they are, printed cardboard containing processed grains. But you will also see them as what they represent, $1 billion of marketing, a century of industrial food production, a web of human desires and fears and hopes all compressed into this single aisle. And you will have no idea how to navigate it. The old mind would have grabbed a box, based on habit or brand loyalty or a vague memory of a commercial, and moved on. But that mind is no longer in charge. And the new mind, the one that sees without judging, has no preference for wheat squares over puffed rice. You are left standing there, a human being confronted with the raw, unmediated absurdity of choice, while other shoppers flow around you like water around a stone, their own minds firmly in place, their own narratives guiding them safely through the trivial chaos. This is when the real work begins. Not the work of escaping the mind, but the work of living with it, of finding a way to function in a world designed for people who believe their thoughts, while you no longer can. It is like being a spy in your own life, fluent in the language of the natives but secretly knowing that the language is made up, that the words do not point to real things, that the whole culture is built on a foundation of shared hallucinations. You learn to participate, but you participate with a wink, with a secret smile, with a distance that can look like detachment to others but feels more like tenderness to you. You go to your job, and you do your work, but you no longer believe that your work defines you. You have conversations with friends, and you say the right words, but you are no longer invested in being right. You fall in love, and you feel the feeling, the full rush of it, the chemical surge, the warmth, the desire, but you no longer mistake the feeling for a promise. You know it is a wave, and you let it carry you, knowing that eventually it will recede, and that is okay. And then something extraordinary happens, something you never could have predicted when you first felt the floor give way beneath you. You begin to see this same capacity for not knowing in others, hidden just beneath the surface of their certainty. You see it in the eyes of a colleague during a meeting, a flicker of doubt that passes too quickly for anyone else to notice, a moment where they almost catch themselves in the act of performing their own confidence. You see it in a stranger on the train, staring out the window with an expression that is not sadness or thought, but simply the absence of expression, a brief vacation from the self. You realize that everyone, in their own way, is standing on that same pier of light. They have just built more elaborate railings. They have just convinced themselves more thoroughly that the pier is made of oak and iron. But the light is still there, beneath their feet, and sometimes, in unguarded moments, they can feel it flicker too. This recognition changes the way you move through the world. The isolation you felt in the beginning, the terrible loneliness of being the only one who knew the truth, begins to dissolve. You are not alone. You have just stopped playing the game as seriously as everyone else. And in that realization, a profound compassion is born. You see a man yelling at his wife in a parking lot, his face red with rage, and you do not see a monster. You see a man who is terrified, a man who has trusted his mind so completely that he believes his interpretation of events is the literal truth, a man who is suffering because his map does not match the territory and he cannot understand why. You see a woman weeping in a cafe, and you do not see a victim. You see a woman whose mind has just told her a devastating story about her life, and she has believed it so fully that her body is now producing tears. The stories are different, but the mechanism is the same. The suffering is universal. And so you begin to interact with people from a different place. You no longer feel the need to correct their maps, to prove that your reality is more accurate than theirs. What would be the point? You have no map to offer them. You have only the territory, and the territory cannot be described, only experienced. So instead, you learn to meet them where they are. You listen to their stories without trying to fix them or argue with them or even believe them. You just listen, as you would listen to the rain, as an event, as a phenomenon. And in that listening, something remarkable happens. People feel heard in a way they may never have felt before. Because you are not listening with your mind, preparing your rebuttal, comparing their story to your story. You are listening with your whole being, and they sense it. They sense that for a few moments, they are not alone in their map. Someone is sitting with them in it, not trying to redraw the borders, just keeping them company. This is the foundation of a new kind of trust. Not trust in the content of your thoughts, but trust in your capacity to be present with whatever arises. Trust in your own awareness, which has been there all along, watching the thoughts come and go, watching the emotions rise and fall, watching the self itself change and shift like clouds. You realize that the one thing you can trust is not the thinker, but the witness. The thinker is a liar. The thinker is a storyteller. The thinker is a survival mechanism that has forgotten it is just a mechanism. But the witness, the simple, silent awareness that has been observing this entire journey from the very first moment, that has never been fooled, that has never been deceived, that has never once believed its own thoughts, that you can trust. That is the only thing you have ever been able to trust. You just never noticed it before because you were too busy listening to the noise. And with this realization, the world comes alive in a new way. Colors are brighter. Sounds are richer. The taste of bread, simple bread, becomes a symphony of textures and flavors that your mind used to gloss over in its rush to the next thought. You sit in a room and you feel the air on your skin, the subtle currents, the warmth and coolness, and you realize that your skin has been feeling this your entire life, but you have never been home to receive the message. You have been lost in thought, living in a world of mental representations, while the real world, the living, breathing, pulsing world, has been waiting for you just behind your eyes. And now, finally, you have turned around. But the journey does not end here. It never ends. There is no final chapter, no resolution where you ride off into the sunset with your newfound wisdom. Life is not a story, remember? It is a process. It is a flow. And you are not the same person who started this journey. That person believed their thoughts. That person lived in a prison of their own making and called it freedom. That person is gone now, dissolved back into the raw material of consciousness from which they were temporarily assembled. And in their place is something harder to define. Not a person, exactly, but a presence. A space. A clearing in which the world can appear as it is, without the constant commentary, without the endless judgment, without the exhausting performance of being someone. There are still moments when the old patterns reassert themselves. There are still days when the mind rises up like a dormant volcano and tries to reclaim its territory. You will find yourself caught in a spiral of anxiety about the future, and for a few hours, you will forget everything you have learned. You will be right back on that collapsing pier, convinced that the fall is coming, convinced that you are not safe. But now, there is a difference. Even in the midst of the spiral, there is a tiny awareness watching it. A still point in the turning world. And that still point knows that the spiral is just a thought pattern. That the anxiety is just energy moving through the body. That the future is a fiction. And slowly, gently, the spiral begins to lose its power. The thoughts keep coming, but they no longer land. They no longer take root. They pass through you like wine through the branches of a tree, and the tree bends, yes, but it does not break. You begin to understand that this is what the mystics and the poets have been trying to tell us for thousands of years. This is what it means to be in the world but not of it. This is what it means to die before you die. You have died to the old self, the self that was made of thoughts and memories and stories, and you have been reborn into something that was always here, something that was never born and can never die. You have stopped trusting your mind, and in doing so, you have found something infinitely more trustworthy. You have found the silence that was here before the first thought arose, the silence that will be here after the last thought fades, the silence that is your true home. And so you walk through the world now as a kind of pilgrim, a stranger in a strange land that is also the most familiar place you have ever been. You carry your uncertainty like a lantern, illuminating the path just ahead of your feet, never trying to see too far, never asking for guarantees. You have learned that the only way to be safe is to surrender the need for safety. The only way to know anything is to embrace not knowing. The only way to trust is to stop looking for something trustworthy and simply trust the looking itself. On a cool evening in late autumn, you find yourself back on a pier. Not the same pier from the beginning, not the pier of light that existed only in imagination, but a real pier, made of wood and iron, extending out over a gray and restless sea. The gulls are crying. The wind is cold on your cheeks. And you stand at the railing, looking out at the horizon where the sky meets the water in a line so perfect it could have been drawn by a divine hand. And you know, without knowing how you know, that this line is also a fiction. The sky does not meet the water. It is all one thing, one vast, interconnected field of being, and the line is just a trick of perspective, a useful illusion that allows you to navigate. But you do not need to navigate the horizon. You only need to stand here, on this pier, in this moment, with the wind in your face and the sound of the gulls in your ears and the vast, unknowable mystery of existence stretching out in every direction. You do not need to know what it means. You do not need to know where you are going. You do not need to know who you are. You only need to be here, fully, completely, without reservation, without the mediator of the mind telling you what any of it means.